How about recession? When is it a remedy in reciprocal obligations? So if there's an injured party, recession becomes available as an alternative remedy. Because the first remedy, if in reciprocal obligations like here, in a contract of sale, let's say, for example, the buyer has already made his payment. But the seller did not deliver the object. So the remedy of the buyer is to demand delivery of the object. And that is, number one, specific performance. And he can also demand damages. So let's reverse it, reverse the fault. This time, the buyer is at fault. Say, for example, the seller has already delivered the object, but the buyer has not paid. So what's the remedy of the seller? Then the remedy of the seller is, number one, to require the buyer in paying or delivering his payment. So in that case, that is specific performance plus payment of damages. That's number one. However, if number one is no longer available, if buyer is hesitant to pay, will not pay, so the seller has the remedy of recession. Of course, plus damages. So this only happens in case of substantial breach. So please take note that these remedies are available only in the alternative. So meaning if the injured party has taken number one remedy, so number two is no longer available. Or if the remedy the injured party has taken number two, then number one is no longer available. However, if the thing is already in the hands of the third person, so meaning the buyer has already sold it to another person who is a buyer in good faith. Let's say, for example, the seller has delivered the object to the buyer, and then the buyer has already sold it to another person. So it's in the hands of a third person. The object is in the hands of a third person. Then the seller can no longer demand specific performance. So he will proceed to recession. That's remedy number two. So question, what are the obligations of the parties in case of recession? So the obligation of the parties are here to return the objects which they have respectively received by virtue of the contract. So in case the buyer files a claim for recession or files a case of recession against the seller, so the seller is therefore bound to give back the money. Or if the seller files a rescission case against the buyer, then the buyer is bound to deliver the object bound to the seller. So they will return the object. So rescission can either be judicial or extrajudicial. So meaning it can be judicial, it can be filed in court. So if it's in court, then the judge will be the one ordering the rescission. Or extrajudicial, meaning it can be out of court, so without the court. So meaning there is a provision in the contract that they can file extrajudicially or without the intervention of the court. Now let's go to obligations subject to a period. This is in Articles 1195 and 1198. It's 1198. 2, example of obligation subject to a period. Now, D promised to pay C 50,000 pesos on January 1 of the following year. So when a period is designated by the parties, in this case, January 1 of the following year, so it is presumed to have been established for the benefit of both. So the benefit of the debtor and the creditor. But if no period is designated, or when the period is dependent on the debtor's will, or when the debtor pays when his means permit him to do so, then the creditor can go to court so the latter may fix the period. This is the creditor missing one R. So the remedy of the creditor, go to court. And the court will fix the period. Example, D promised to pay C 10,000 pesos as soon as possible. So here there is no fixed period. As soon as possible. Could be immediate, could be, we do not know. Yeah? So C has the right to, as a creditor, he can go to court so that the court may fix the period. However, there are instances when the debtor will lose his right of benefit of the period which has been established. What are these instances? Number 1, when after entering a contract, the debtor becomes insolvent. What is an insolvent person? Insolvent person meaning he has few assets left, not enough to pay his obligation. Kapag assets, but not enough to pay. So, but except when he gives guarantees or security for the debt. So the debtor must give guarantee in order that he will not lose the benefit of a period. Case number 2, when the debtor does not furnish the guarantees or security which he has promised to the creditor. In case number 3, when the debtor has impaired the guarantees or securities by his own acts, meaning impaired is prejudiced, no? Or through fortuitous events, unless he immediately furnishes new ones. When the debtor violates any undertaking in consideration of the period. So when he violates the terms or conditions of the contract that is have to do with the period, then he loses the benefit of a period. So meaning the creditor, in this example, the creditor will not wait for January 1, meaning the obligation becomes due and demandable. And lastly, when the debtor attempts to abscond. What do you mean by attempts to abscond? Abscond means to escape or evade. No? So if he, let's say for example, transfers residence that is already absconding, no, from his obligation to pay. Therefore, the obligation of 50,000 pesos becomes due and demandable. Now, there are obligations which are in accordance with the plurality of object, meaning the prestation, the object to be delivered. No? So if there is only one object, it is simple. Say, for example, and oblige yourself to give May 18 karat gold necklace. So there's only one object to be delivered, or which is the obligation of and. So it is simple. It becomes alternative when there are two or more objects promised, but delivery of any of the object shall extinguish the obligation. Example, Leah promised to give Faye on her graduation day either a Sony 55-inch TV, which has a value of 60,000 pesos, a high fidelity stereo system worth 48,000, or a cash of 50,000 pesos. So in this case, it is in the alternative. Delivery of any one of these three makes or extinguishes the obligation. Question, who has the right of choice in this obligation? So answer, if not agreed by the parties, if not agreed between Leah and Fe, then it is the debtor who has the right of choice. But the moment the debtor communicates his choice to the creditor, the obligation becomes a simple one. So it reverts back to simple. So let's say, for example, Leah will communicate to Fe that she's giving 50,000 pesos. So from that moment, the obligation becomes a simple obligation, no longer alternative. So what is significant here is the communication. If there is an agreement, the creditor may have the right to choose. In the same token, communication of choice to the debtor shall make the obligation simple.